analytics at a reinsurance broking company called Willis. And first and foremost, thank you very much for choosing this session. First and foremost, and secondly, thank you to Will for kindly setting up this session. Just let me get my notes. That would be helpful. We can make a proper start.
Rowan?
Yeah.
You need to talk into the mic.
Because you're recorded.
Oh, we're recorded, are we?
We can all hear well, but
Okay, alrighty. Okay, well, thank you, Will, for the invitation to come. And I think at the beginning of this morning, it was advised that the IAA needed to sort of reach out to new communities to make insurance, impact assessment part of the supply chain of a rather wider world. And I suppose this session here is a bit of mutual outreach. It's a bit of mutual outreach from the insurance and reinsurance world to connect to a wider world. And clearly, you are the brave pioneers of the IAIA community who should be saluted at the reception tonight for braving it to come to a bunch of insurance folks. Because we actually, I've learnt this morning that there is a tremendous overlap in the worlds in which we operate, and I think that's going to come through very clearly in the next hour or so. And I'm going to try and set the scene of the insurance world for those of you who have been blissfully immune from that for the last sort of 20 or 30 years of your careers, or maybe even less, and sort of introduce my colleagues through that mechanism. So first and foremost, the insurance world splits up into two halves. There's the life insurance and there's non-life insurance, collectively worth about $4 trillion of premium income a year. We're going to forget about life insurance for the moment. Important, but not this afternoon. So that leaves non-life insurance, which is basically half of that, about $2 trillion a year. And essentially, you can insure yourselves against three sorts of things. Either the damage you can do to yourself, or the accidents you can incur on yourself. And that's pretty significant. But we're really interested this afternoon about really important events, really big losses. And there's really only two sources of those. Either Mother Nature or US lawyers. So essentially, you can insure yourself against Mother Nature, or you can insure yourself against US lawyers. And the real concern we all have is when these two mighty forces get together. So, and that could well come in this theme of climate risk as well. So, if you're very intelligent as a consumer of insurance, whether you're buying house insurance or going to insuring a project, you can perhaps, if you want to, go to an insurance broker to help you assess the risk and select the best sort of insurance companies to go and choose. Those which can be the best security and negotiate the best price. So we have an example of an insurance broker here, Rick Hawkenbury. Where are you, Rick? Rick's one of my colleagues. He's an insurance broker, and it's his job to advise people about risk and ultimately place insurance. And and Rick, being a very high quality insurance broker, would choose very high quality underwriters and insurers to select. He may choose, I can't think he would choose anyone else other than Zurich Insurance Company, represented here by Lindy and Patton, who's in charge of their climate risk products, or indeed Chris, who's in charge, who's a senior executive at FM Global. Now you could, if you're a really sophisticated consumer, go to these sorts of companies directly. They're very well known, they do lots of advertising, but essentially these companies will provide both risk advice and risk management advice, but also transfer excess risks that you have by giving you insurance contracts. And insurance contracts are simply an option on someone else's capital if something goes wrong. Now, insurance companies themselves worry about extreme risk, extremes of severity, extremes of frequency, or extremes of duration. And Mother Nature really drives much of that. And insurance companies will buy their own reinsurance. That's called reinsurance. And of that $2 trillion a year in the non-life insurance market, about 10% of that is passed on to reinsurance companies to act as a kind of a global pot when nasty things occur. So that's the sort of insurance companies that insurance companies buy, and they would come to a company like mine, Willis Re, which is a reinsurance broker, which does exactly the same sort of thing as my colleague Rick does, assess the risk and place the business of perhaps FM Global or Zurich with reinsurance companies, some of which you'll have heard of, like Munich Re or Swiss Re. Reinsurance companies themselves need reinsurance. That's called retrocessional insurance, and it just goes on and on and on. But just so that you're aware, about 10% of all the insurance premiums you spend on your house or your car is actually passed to this global pot called reinsurance. And when there's a bushfire in Australia, or a hurricane going up the east coast of the US, or another event, and claims are paid, all of us are contributing to those claims through this wonderful community product called insurance and reinsurance. It is the essence of a civilized society. It's almost as much of a community product as taxation, but this is a good thing. But in order to do insurance, reinsurance, you've got to understand the risk very, very well, otherwise you lose money. And that leads me to my final introduction, although it won't be my final speaker. I think the first speaker is Deborah Ballon, who is General Counsel at a fabulous new initiative which has been funded entirely by the insurance industry. I think all of the participants here are supporters of the initiative. It's just opened a $40 million lab in North Carolina, which is the largest laboratory in the world that can simulate floods, windstorms, wildfire on full structures. And the issue is, because while we need to understand Mother Nature, the critical thing is to understand what impact that has on the built environment, individual structures, and indeed portfolios of risk. And the fact of the matter is we need to do and support advanced open science to do that. Which leads me to, actually, that was my penultimate introduction, because in many countries in the world, when it comes to natural catastrophe risk, it's not the insurance industry alone that undertakes that risk transfer mechanism. The public sector does too. In the US here, of course, flood risk, for at least domestic risk, is undertaken through the National Flood Insurance Programme. And in many countries of the world, the recent earthquake in New Zealand was managed through the New Zealand Earthquake Commission, which is a parastatal organisation which basically shares risk between in that community. And the World Bank here has played an enormous role in stimulating and supporting this sort of work. And Francis Guesquier leads that programme here in the World Bank for Latin America, although I must say has an influence far beyond that region. And indeed, he hosted a very major conference here at the bank in June called Understanding Risk, where many countries of the world were brought together with insurers, but also critically a range of technical specialists to really bring science and technology together to the risk transfer business. And Francis is going to talk a little bit about that. I think the final point I want to make is that the boundaries between many worlds are breaking down. And I think it was Courtney Lawrence talked about some of the influences that can be quite pivotal in creating new supply chains. I'm just going to give one example from our industry which has totally revolutionized the way that we're understanding risk and creating new supply chains. And it's this. Around the world, there is a new, almost convention becoming established, driven by, excuse me, could you kindly, if I could ask you to kindly shut the door, because I'm getting a bit of competitive interference from someone. There is an emerging convention that says that the insurance policies that you or I buy should tolerate the 1 in 200 year return period. And effectively, what regulators are doing in Europe and beyond is saying that insurance policies, and therefore the companies that underwrite them, should be able to withstand the maximum probable loss, or dare I say it, conspiracy of multiple losses that could reasonably expected to occur in a 1 in 200 year return period. This simply stated requirement is having an absolutely overwhelming impact on the way that risk is managed and evaluated within insurance and reinsurance companies. Fundamentally, it's an overwhelmingly positive development, although it has all sorts of challenges. And natural catastrophe risk is a major driver of the capital requirements of insurance companies. But if you're dealing at the tolerance level of that extreme, historical data alone, perhaps 50 years of decent data in the US, much less elsewhere, is simply not sufficient to understand risks at that 1 in 200 year tolerance level, especially when you're dealing with the extremes. And the extremes of distribution is where you usually have the highest volatility and the highest uncertainty. And what this has led to is, dare I say it, within the climate community, a seismic change in the way that risk is done. And what's happened is a brand new supply chain has emerged through a new thread called modelling. And Courtney from Citibank touched on this morning, and I was so pleased that there's a mirror between our worlds. What's happening is blue sky public science, in the shape of advanced climate modelling and other sources of expertise, is being used to try and understand the likely frequency and severity of, say, tropical cyclones. Not just under climate change in the years to come, but right now. We don't understand the true distributions under current climate regimes. And that public science is being incorporated into the, if you like, industrial models we have to use, which are called catastrophe risk models, which are then becoming imports into the capital models that we need to run our companies and manage our risk. And indeed, those are informing, to some degree, the science at least, is the regulatory capital models that are being developed in Europe and elsewhere. Suddenly, science, through the modelled world, is creating brand new supply chains, which are ultimately dictating which way capital moves. And there was a big debate this morning about how do we change public opinion. Well, I can assure you, the amount of insurance premium you're paying for your policies is now being affected by that science. You don't know it's happening behind the scenes. And I think one of the interesting things is what are going to be the pivot points and connections between our worlds and your supply chains. So that's really the introduction. Now, I must confess, our group have sort of converged almost momentarily before the show, so we weren't able to get together beforehand. But what I'm going to ask is, Deborah, do you mind starting off? Because I wanted a little bit of shock and awe, and I think that if I wanted to sort of blast away all the preconceptions you have about insurance, and allow you to go home and with pride say you were a part of an insurance presentation today, Deborah, you were going to be the culture changer. Over to you.